Hi everyone, welcome to Geometry Lesson 8.4, Angles of Elevation and Depression, Part 2. So our last example in this lesson is a rather complicated example, but it's another word problem, so let's read through it first and then we'll see what we can do to make sense of it. It says, a pilot flying at an altitude of 2.7 kilometers sights two control towers directly in front of her. The angle of depression to the base of one tower is 37 degrees, and the angle of depression to the base of the other tower is 58 degrees. What is the distance between the two towers? Round to the nearest tenth of a kilometer. So notice they're giving us two different angles of depression for this one situation with the pilot flying. My suggestion would be to actually draw two separate triangles and treat it as two separate situations. And then in the end, we can find the difference between the two distances, and that's going to be the distance that we need. So step one of this is to try and draw your diagram. Okay, if you want, you can layer the diagrams. If you want, you can draw them separately. I like to draw them separately. I find it a lot less confusing. So try and do that first, and then press play and see if you're right. So what I did is I actually drew three diagrams. My first diagram shows everything as it would be labeled from having just one drawing. Here's my pilot, that's 2.7 kilometers high in her airplane. Here's her original line of sight. Now she's looking 37 degrees down to the Tower B, and she's looking 58 degrees down to Tower A. Okay, so notice, again, these measurements are outside of the triangles, so I used alternate interior angles to bring them into my triangles. And I labeled this distance as Y. I labeled the distance between them as X, and I labeled the total distance as Z. So in my other diagrams, where I separated them, here I have the pilot. She's looking 58 degrees down to Tower A. Okay, and I brought the 58 degrees right here, and this is 2.7. And you can see that this is much simpler to look at than the one above it. So that's why I did this. I separated it out because it's easier to look at and it's easier to figure out what to do. Okay, in the second picture here, I drew the pilot's line of sight. She's looking 37 degrees down, and I brought the 37 into my triangle using alternate interior angles, and here's the 2.7 height that she is, and I labeled this as Z. So what you're going to do next is you're going to use these two triangles to try and find the measurements for Y and Z. So pause the video, do that, and then press play to see if you're right. So to find the distance to the first tower in this diagram, I saw that my 58 degrees was here. I had the opposite side, and I wanted to know the adjacent side. So again, that's going to be tangent. So I did the tangent of 58 equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. I multiplied by Y to get my Y to this side. Then I divided by the tangent of 58. So in my calculator, I typed in 2.7 divided by the tangent of 58, and I got 1.6871, and it kind of went on from there. But because they're asking to round to the 10th, I just cut it off at the 1. Okay. For the second tower, they gave us a 37 here, and we have the opposite and adjacent side. That's also going to be tangent. So I wrote tangent of 37 equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. Then I multiplied by Z, and I divided by the tangent of 3.7, and I got this fraction. When I typed that into my calculator, I got approximately 3.5830. Now I need the distance between these towers. Y is the distance to the first tower. Z is the total distance to the second tower. All I need to do is subtract these. So try and subtract those and see if you're right in just a second. When I subtracted, I got 3.5830 minus 1.6871, which is approximately 1.9. Okay, now Remember, rounding is something that we avoid doing at all costs because it makes our answers inaccurate. So try to avoid rounding if at all possible. If you have a newer calculator, what you can do is use the arrow keys to scroll up and get one of the big long numbers from a previous result. And then if you hit enter, it'll bring it down to where you're doing your current calculating. And you can do that for both of these numbers. So I highly recommend doing that because, well, it keeps your answer as accurate as possible. So the last thing that you have for this lesson is another check it out question. Check it out number 4 says, a pilot flying at an altitude of 12,000 feet sights 2 airports directly in front of him. The angle of depression to one airport is 78 degrees, and the angle of depression to the second airport is 19 degrees. What is the distance between the 2 airports? Round to the nearest foot. So that's it for this lesson. Just finish that check it out question and let me know if you have any questions.